Welcome back to the channel. This is, I think I just realized this. It's the first episode of Open Source Cafe for 2024, the one and only Itiel from Commodor. So I'm very excited. Thanks a lot for joining, Itiel. And how's it going?
I'm good. I'm honored to be the first guest for 2024. Quite happy.
Yeah. New year, new plans, doing some very nice things for the community. By the way, shout out to the platformers community. If you want to check that out, check out the links in the description below. And I'm in my new apartment, still settling in. So new life, new year. Very excited about this year. And today we're talking about a very interesting topic, which is Kubernetes migration. And believe we're going to talk about expectations versus reality, right? So if you're planning to, because this is what I hear, I go to a lot of conferences and I talk to people, and even if you go to Kubernetes conferences, you're like, are you using Kubernetes? And they're like, no, we have heard about it, it's very cool, but we are not using Kubernetes because we don't have the resources to migrate, and it's just complex, and we are not trained or whatever. These questions arise. So the first point that I would like to address is, can you maybe, like, before we move forward with the migration process, can you elaborate on the primary motivations that are driving organizations to migrate to Kubernetes? And I think that's the
Yeah.
simple.
So let's talk a bit about that. I think Kubernetes in general had a lot of promises, and like to say like the biggest ones are like increase the velocity of your dev team, meaning you will be able to deploy features faster to customers, easily scalable infra, because Kubernetes is like promising you like the HPA and the ability to add nodes, then scaling becomes less of an issue. Increase uptime. Kubernetes has a lot of mechanism to be like auto healing, and to make sure that your system is always up. Standardization, because the way Kubernetes works, which is basically Docker orchestration or container orchestration, then all of the different applications can look the same and reduce cost and be a bit more like, I will say both cost and security are also very big parts of that. Those are derived from the fact that everything is standardized. So once everything is standardized, it's easier to do this kind of cost allocation and to do like a single security policy. So Kubernetes in general provides a lot, or like it offers you a lot of promises. And I would say maybe like the only thing that I didn't mention is like maybe it's sexy right now. So it's more like, okay, it's hot, it's sexy, we should migrate to Kubernetes. We don't even know why, but we heard that everyone else is doing that. So it's maybe not the best or like real reason, but I think a lot of companies are migrating simply due to the popularity of Kubernetes.
I have another question. Can you maybe share a scenario where Kubernetes might not be the right fit? Because that's something I get asked quite a lot. Because with microservices, you have like, you need a bigger team then.
Yeah.
And I believe there are projects and companies that are solving this issue. But just for the audience, just so that they can also understand, what are some of the scenarios? How do you know? That's essentially like the summary of the question. How do you know that you are ready for the move?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kunal. So I will split the answer to two. Like if you are just starting your company now, or like you are just doing some small project, Kubernetes is not the right answer for you. Kubernetes requires a lot of knowledge, a lot of understanding. It does take time to master, and it probably will be much easier working with AWS Fargate, or maybe serverless, or even like hosting one single machine and like uploading your application on top of that. Because all of the cloud providers already have like the ability to run a container. I think Kubernetes makes sense when you have some requirements that are very important to you, and it might be around scaling or hybrid and cloud and cloud or cross cloud. Those kind of scenarios like scream Kubernetes. And I think from a certain maturity of a company, Kubernetes, simply because its ability to standardize and also it's easier to attract talent, it becomes a no-brainer. Like if you reach some certain of like a size, maybe 100 developers to the north, you probably need to deep dive into Kubernetes if you are not doing that already, because like the industry is going there. It is going to be the next big thing, and it will be harder for you to retain talent or to hire talent by saying, "Oh, I'm running with like a bare metal EC2 chef, and everything is like manually built or things like that." So if you are small, probably don't use Kubernetes. If you are large, then you are probably already like investigating migrating to Kubernetes. And in between, like I love like simple things. So if you can work without Kubernetes, to in the beginning, I think it can be a valuable thing for you. That being said, when you scale to like a full-blown company, it's probably like a good way or time to use Kubernetes. I do recommend almost everyone to use Docker and containers. Like this will make the migration to Kubernetes easier on one hand, and it's not that hard on the other. Like you can use already like containers around AWS Fargate, and Google has its container platform something, and you can even do serverless with Docker. So I do recommend containers for everyone. Kubernetes from a certain scale.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think it's about what your use case is. There was a recent post that went viral that was about cloud providers. So like we saved millions and millions of dollars moving away from cloud providers. I think it was the founder of Hey.com.
Yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Good.
that
Yes.
was a very popular post. And I think, yeah, that's exactly, if you have the resources, if it's, whatever your scenario is, your current team is, and how big your company is, so on and so forth. Speaking of cloud providers, when we talk about migration, the migration process, the number one question is, what are some of the key factors that you consider when choosing a cloud provider and a Kubernetes distribution for the migration?
So I think when you choose like the Kubernetes distribution and cloud provider, you should think first of all on the use case, right? Of and in your company, and where are you going? So we have the big ones like the hyperscalers, like clouds, which is the Google, AWS, Azure, and Ali if you're running on China. But those are if you need all of these like bangs and whistles basically to be able to grow very fast with a very big team and very complicated setups. Even GK is a bit simpler in terms. On the other hand, you have like the more easy to use and much more friendly for newcomers. And I know Sivo, where you work at Conal, and also DigitalOcean has a good offering around that. So I think it depends on the type of company. And also, if you are already using one of the cloud providers, it is much easier to stay on the cloud that you are in. Like you don't need to migrate to a different cloud just to use Kubernetes. When it comes to choosing the relevant flavor, if you're running on the cloud, then just choose whatever, like take whatever the cloud provider is offering you. And if you are running on-prem, there are like three main options, which is Tanzu, I will say, OpenShift, and Rancher. And I think the majority of players are now like in favor of OpenShift, as Rancher is doing, as Tanzu is doing like a bit of changes in their offering.
Yeah, thanks for sharing it, TL. I believe there was a recent news about some price change in for the on-prem ones.
Yeah, of Tanzu,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like ever since Broadcom bought Tanzu, I feel that something is like not that like they are not sure how to handle it. So but a lot of things are a bit weird there. I would also say SUSE Labs acquired Rancher, and I think also in that regards, things like change a bit ever since the acquisition, or at least that's what we see. Because I do see more people like deciding on going to OpenShift, or on the other hand, like not needing any of the cloud providers at all, any of the distribution at all, like running vanilla Kubernetes.
Yep. It's also about, when we talk about migration process, right? By the way, thanks a lot for sharing, and couldn't agree more. Can you maybe also walk us through the assessment and the planning phase of a Kubernetes migration? Like, okay, now you decide, okay, now I want to do it. What does the
Yeah.
planning phase look like? What are some of the critical components?
Yeah, good. I think like it depends and vary between companies. But first of all, like you need to choose the cloud. You need to choose the distribution, And then you need to choose what is the first application that I'm going to migrate, and what would the success look like. Will a success be all of the application running in the cloud? Will a success be only the compute layer running in Kubernetes and the rest not? Like, you need to understand what's a good win for you. And I really suggest around picking a single application or a service and migrating it throughout all of the stages, which is like the QA environment, the staging environment, the production environment, making everything Kubernetes. So usually it's around, what do we want to migrate? What are the timelines that we have? And then to choose the relevant service to migrate. Again, my recommendation is to choose something which is not super monolithic, super legacy, because those kind of applications are hard. And in Commodor, we meet a lot of customers that already tried a migration, they failed, and now they're doing another migration with a much smaller scope. So I will also start with the smaller scope possible, so my team can learn Kubernetes and we can see how it works without having the pressure of migrating all of the system. Migration in a in a well-established company is probably like a couple of years process, like everything to migrate everything to Kubernetes.
Nice. Would you say like Kubernetes migration can give you a migraine?
I think that the amount of white hairs that Kubernetes has created for so many of our customers, it's crazy. And you meet very talented people, very talented, like super talented people that are like, the CTO told us that we need to migrate to Kubernetes. He said that it should like take 6 months or something like that, and because we don't have a lot of time, let's do like a shift and lift and make sure that it works. But in reality, the majority of Kubernetes like migration I'm seeing did fail on the first occasion, mainly because they try to bite too much than they can chew, and they try to migrate too many things at once without having this like plan around the migration itself. And again, like very clear like steps.
So what would you say are some of the common challenges encountered during the migration of applications and data to Kubernetes?
Yeah, I think like when migrating to Kubernetes, there are like 5 different things that make it especially hard. There's usually a lack of knowledge inside the team. They already know how to run the old infra, not the new one. Lack of tools. A lot of the tools that you might be using can't be applied to Kubernetes. Maybe it's Chef, maybe it's Puppet, maybe it's how you monitor. Those kind of tools sometimes don't work anymore. Lack of processes. Your current setup works, right? Like if you work in a big company, it already works. You now need to reinvent the wheel in some ways around how do we handle issues? How do we handle like new features, bugs, and so on? Multiple stakeholders is another problem. Kubernetes and all of the platform engineering concept is like a single team that is given services to a lot of different personas. And it might be the FinOps guys or the security or the compliance or the developers. So everyone have a stake and everyone is trying to push towards their direction. And the last thing I will say is like hard deadlines. I see more and more that people underestimate like how much time will the migration take me. I can share with you that I used to work in a different company, in a company named Rookout, that was acquired by Dynatrace, and we met a lot of companies. I met a lot of companies when I worked there. It was 6 years ago, and when I met like one of our customers, he told me that they have a Kubernetes migration plan. This was like a very well-established company, and I asked him how much time will it take you, and then he said like we hope to do it by 6 months. In reality, it will take us a year, and that's it. And I told him that sounds very optimistic for such a big company that has so many different like pieces. Maybe it will take you a bit longer because Kubernetes is complex. And I can tell you that 6 years later, they still didn't fully finish the migration. So I think that's like a bit of like a rare case, but for a company in their size, which is like a couple of thousands of developers, I would again estimate that migration, everything is like like maybe it's a 5-year plan or something like that.
5 years. In your experience, maybe can
for banks that we meet, and some of our banks, the like customers who are banks, it's usually like a 10-year plan for migrating to Kubernetes. So maybe even 5 years is optimistic. Again, migration is hard. Like anyone that tells you that migration is easy is like simply lying to you. Because when you do the migration, you find how fragile was your system to begin with. You dig in all of the buried bodies that someone put there to cope with different circumstances and to basically to solve different issues. So migration is always hard. Migration to Kubernetes is even harder because it's like migrating to a whole new technology stack. So yeah.
So what would you say are some of the effective strategies for optimizing and, let's say, continuously improving a Kubernetes environment? Let's say if you spend 5 years already, so post migration, how would you continuously improve?
I think first of all, like having the right tools, right? Like I'll do like a shameless plug here for like a Commodor, but make sure that you have the right tools in place. And in Kubernetes, you have two main personas, as I see it. You have on one hand the platform engineers, or like SRE or infra guys, depends how you call them. Those are the kind of people who need to operate large amount of clusters and like services in the minimal downtime, minimal cost, and minimum toil on their hand. And those people need to make sure that they have the right tools in place to support them. On the other hand, we have the developers. And the developers, usually they are forced to use Kubernetes. It's not like it's in their roadmap. Someone in the company thought Kubernetes is a good idea for them, and now they are forced to use it. And for them, I think what's important is education. Explain to them what is Kubernetes, why is it good for them, and why they should migrate to Kubernetes. And also, again, like giving them the right tools to make sure that they are effective. Again, like Commodor, but you can also do it like with your own set of services or like to spend time and money on that. I can share that I recently in my podcast, I interviewed the platform engineer, group lead, the platform engineer at the Forter. And he told me that they gave a lot of candies, right, for the developers. They told them that they're going to get the auto healing. They're going to get the Argo CD, which enable them to deploy faster. So you need to think, what are the candies? What's in it for me? Not only for you as like a platform engineer, but also for the end users of the platform.
That's interesting. One thing that developers don't like is working with YAML. For example, giving an example, and I see a lot of people trying to solve that challenges. And now with the whole platform engineering thing, I mean it's not like new. Platform engineering people have been doing it previously as well. It's not like it's replacing DevOps. But can you maybe, like, for the folks who are just watching, touch little bit on that as well, and community as well? So maybe you can share about that as well.
Yeah, great point. I think most mature companies have some sort of abstraction layer on top of Kubernetes, and it might be using Helm, it might be using like templates in Backstage or anything else. And the goal is to abstract the creation of services from the developers. For example, in Rookout, again, like my previous company, if a developer wanted to deploy a new service, all he needed to do is to have a file, maybe it was a YAML or a JSON, service name, type of like programming language, and where is this Docker file or whatever, and that's it. Like, he didn't need to understand or to know all of the different aspects of Kubernetes. And I think when you want to gain developer adoption, when it comes to the creation phase, developers don't really need to know all of the bits and bytes of, is this PVC with an SSD, or it's like configured a bit differently or whatever. I think there are some important things that they need to control and to tweak, but the majority of things should be delivered to them as a platform, as a product, and to make sure that they are able to onboard and to understand that as easily as possible.
Yeah, and when we talk about, we were talking about the challenges right now. Can you also maybe address about some of the common pitfalls that companies face, when they're performing the migration, and how can be mitigated? And by the way, for the platformers community, the joining link is in the description below, so you all can check that out.
I will say like 2 or the 3 biggest ones is, first of all, like eating more than you can chew, meaning trying to move too fast without having the appropriate knowledge and tools. Sometimes you are trying too many different things. I meet a lot of companies that are migrating to Commodor, to Kubernetes and adding Istio on day 0. And Istio is very complex by its own. For example, like combining both Istio and Kubernetes, is someone who don't know Kubernetes, it's like a suicide for most people, so don't do that. And another one is creating like hate inside the company. You should find those people who will be your like how do you say it? One second, like the one that will spread the news basically around Kubernetes inside your organization. So you need to find those early adopters and to harness them on your side. If you are a couple of months into the process and you don't have any strong champion inside the team, you are doing something wrong. Go back to the drawing board and understand what you can bring them. And iteration. Like in the end of the day, it is a very long journey, like migrating to Kubernetes. You need to treat it as one. It's not like a sprint. I start, I finish. It's okay. Now I have my service in staging. Now I have my service in prod. Now I have the CD. So make sure that you have different stages and every stage can be completed and you have a clear DOD of how does a success looks like.
Let's talk a bit more about some of the tools that you recommend, for the migration journey.
Yeah, so like obviously Commodor, because we see quite a lot of companies using migration, like choosing Commodor. But other than Commodor, I will say that the default stack is quite good. Like the classical one is Prometheus and Kibana, maybe Prometheus and Loki if you want to be only on the Grafana stack, or Elastic and Elastic APM if you want the Elastic stack. I'm quite a big fan of like a Datadog for monitoring. They are very costly, but they are a great product. And other than that, I think like those are like make sure that you have the right monitoring in place. With Commodore, you are getting also like the management capabilities. Other nice tools are like Lens or K9S to view the clusters. And I see more and more companies that are adding policies on top of their clusters. So Oppa or Kyverno, or again like Commodore, has those capabilities. Maybe one last very important like family of tools are cost reduction tools. So you have like again like Commodore, but you have KubeCost and you have others. So make sure that you have also the right cost tools in place. And if not, like your FinOps is probably going to be very angry at you very, very fast.
Very expensive. Yeah, it can get pretty expensive pretty
Yeah,
fast.
it's very easy to get expensive with Kubernetes. Only changes like in one YAML from 10 to 100, and that's it. Like you pay 10x more, and it was like a typo.
Yeah, and it's just, I think the first step of cost reduction is visibility. If you
Yeah.
don't see where the money is going, you can't reduce it. And as your infrastructure grows, it can get a bit more complex. So, like, yeah, there are tools out there that you can try out, to work with that. But when we talk about, migration, so obviously there are various stages, right? The day 0, day 1, day 2. So what are some of the essential elements for success, and how do priorities and the strategies shift across various stages? So maybe can you talk about the stages a little bit?
Yeah, I think in day 0, your goal is to make sure application is running in production. That is a success. Running, serving your own customers, and everything is working in a reliable fashion. That's like the day 0 thing. And probably also like secured and compliance, like per the company, if you need compliance, yes or no. Day 2 is more on how do I reduce the toil? Meaning, how can I be much more effective as a platform engineer? And how can I take all of those manual tasks, cluster upgrades, deprecated API, and so on, that takes me a lot of time, and automate them? How do I bring value to other people inside the company? Again, the security, the compliance, the developers. How do I empower them so they can also like enjoy the benefits of Kubernetes? And cost is also something that usually should be addressed on day 2 and not day 1. It's like a luxury. Observability, on the other hand, should be in day 1 because everything is going to crash at the beginning. So you need to make sure that you have the right set of tools to begin with. So I think like that's it.
Is there anything that you can hold off to, for later?
I think things like cost, automated upgrades, and policies can also be depending on the company if you need those guardrails, yes or no. Even things like auto scaling, Carpenter, like all of those tools help you mainly like to save money or save time. But at the beginning, just make sure that you have this very thin like a pipeline that is working end to end. Like even Argo, for example, can be like added later on. You don't need Argo from day zero. If it's make your life easier, then like do it. But I think it can also like be like a bit later. I really love Argo and Helm, right? But it's not a must. It's more like I feel like a luxury. Even today, it's like Argo is so popular, so maybe it's even easier if you are using Argo from day one.
Yeah, makes sense. When we talk about the current trends, so can you maybe explore and share with us the layers of modern Kubernetes management, right? So we can talk about like data collection and aggregation, smart
Uh,
governance, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing that we're seeing is a lot of hybrid environment. Like all of the big companies are running multiple Kubernetes flavors across different like cloud providers and probably hybrid as well. And in order to do that, you need to make sure that you have the ability to manage like dozens of different clusters across those different environments and having those tools. So like a centralized place for logging, a centralized place for metrics, a tool that allows you to manage those clusters. It might be Commodore, it might be OpenShift, it might be Rancher. But when you reach like a certain level of maturity, you probably need one of those tools. I think governance, again, it's like big boys problems, but governance, like cluster hygiene, are things that once you have like a couple of dozens of clusters, they became from like a nice to have to a must have. And in the industry, I see that every company just increasing and getting more and more clusters. Like if like 6 years ago, spinning up cluster was super hard and you tried to push everything inside a single cluster, now everyone was like, yeah, sure, he gets a cluster and he gets a cluster and he gets a cluster. So it changes how you treat clusters and how you monitor and operate clusters.
Amazing. And thanks a lot for sharing, Itiel, and really learned a lot. Sure, the viewers and myself as well from this conversation. Very interesting topic indeed. We can go on and on. But one last question I'd like to ask you is you mentioned about Commodor um, being a helpful tool in Kubernetes migration. So where does Commodore is put in the picture? Like at which stage, and how do you help with Kubernetes migration?
Yeah, sure. So, great question, right, Kunal? So what we do is we're like a tool that a lot of companies already used us to migrate. If it's from Docker Swarm, if it's from Bare Metal, if it's from Pivotal or like Cloud Foundry, we have a lot of success stories from companies using Commodore in order to expedite the migration process. This is because, first of all, we provide the right guardrails just out of the bat, meaning best practices, configuring of the clusters and application, make sure everything works as it's expected. Then what we do is reduce the complexity of Kubernetes, and that in turn allow you to troubleshoot much faster and allow you to bring more people, and it reduced the entry of barrier for Kubernetes. Instead of learning like a year of Kubernetes before being effective, with Commodore you can do it in a couple of days. So by simplifying most of the Kubernetes operation and troubleshooting, people don't require that level of expertise in order to use it. And we help again with the setting up of the cluster, cost management, policy enforcement, and more particularly, or like our like secret sauce is the ability also to help non-experts to troubleshoot their code and application. So think about it that a developer that don't know Kubernetes is quite clueless around how do I fix issues. With Commodore, we have a guided troubleshooting experience that walk him hand in hand around where to look, like what happened, why did it happen, and what you should do now for every Kubernetes issue. So yeah, I think that a tool like Commodore can be very, very meaningful when doing this migration, and we already have a lot of experience from huge companies that use us to expedite their migration process.
Amazing. Well, thanks a lot for sharing, ETL, and all the links can be found in the description below. I'm very excited for this year and what Commodore does next. But very interesting because I think you started a Kubernetes community with a K, which went really really nicely. Thousands of people joining, and then now there's a dedicated community for platformers. So it's very interesting. Looking forward to see what you folks do, and yeah, always here to support as well. But for folks who are watching, if you don't already know, go check out Commodor, and yeah, they have some nice open source projects as well. But yeah, thanks a lot for sharing, Itiel. Really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Thank you. Meet in KubeCon Paris. Bye
Yep.
bye.